Okay, so there's a remake of Nier Replicant coming up, concisely rebranded as Nier Replicant version 1.224744871139. It's a very well-loved game by its fans, but it's more likely that you've heard of the wildly successful sequel, Nier Automata, or at the very least, you've probably seen Art of 2B somewhere on the internet. Turns out, having a pretty android protagonist with a skirt you can explode off makes your character design really, memorable. But the series began a long time ago, with the 3 Drakengard games, followed by Nier Gestalt, or the Japan-exclusive version, which was Nier Replicant. The only real difference between Gestalt and Replicant is the protagonist's age, so don't worry too much about missing context by only playing one or the other. Gestalt casts you as a 39-year-old man caring for his sick daughter, Yona, and he goes through a JRPG-style adventure to gather magic and find out how to cure her and possibly the world from a deadly disease, the Black Scrawl. Replicant is exactly the same, except you're a 15-year-old boy caring for his little sister. Both games have you explore themed areas of the world, and you'll unlock routes to different places as you go from your village hub. But this is a Yoko Taro game, so just imagine a typical RPG shot through with existential agony and characters you wish you could just burrito and shock blankets, and yeah, that's the experience. The remake is going with the brother-sister model, which I think works a lot better when the protagonist is talking about the power of friendship.
Yes, you and I are friends now.
Or when he's desperate enough to earn enough money for medicine that he'll take literally any job. It's a little strange for a near 40-year-old man to have no source of income or work, but with a teenager it makes more sense. Plus, Yona's guilt for depending on her big brother's far more understandable than a daughter feeling bad about burdening her father, but it works well enough given the rewrite. I played Gestalt, so I'll be using it as the default for this video when discussing the story, but you can just mentally substitute father with brother if you're excited about Replicant. The games at their core explore what it means to be human in every sense of the word, and each game in the series approaches the concept from a different angle. So this is going to be a 3-part series on the Drake and Nier universe, starting with Nier Gestalt and Replicant. I'm going to break this down game by game using the alchemical model of body, soul, and spirit. And while all of these things are presented in and significant to each game, I feel each one aligns pretty coherently with one of the 3. Honestly, I was going with this model just because I'm a nerd and alchemy's an interest of mine that really fit the feel of the series, but on watching a story recap video whilst writing the next part of this, I found it's actually an integral part of Nier Automata. 3 towers you need to climb whilst one character's having an existential crisis are labelled Meat Box, Soul Box, and God Box. Or body, soul, spirit.
Vindication!
Returning our focus to Nier Gestalt for now though, this is a story about found family. Almost all of the characters have something physically different or monstrous about them, and today I'm focusing on how Nier Gestalt and Replicant consider the question, how far does your body make you human? The characters are all lonely, rejected for their differences, but their friends accept and love them, treating them as human as anyone else. It's a very obvious disability metaphor running throughout, but I thought it would be more fun to focus on the alchemical angle, because then I can compare them more easily to the other soul and spirit angles of the series and see how they fit together. The next video will be on whether or not your soul and mind are what make you human, and then the final part of the series will be on what connects the two, the spirit. Like my heart after Yoko Taro was done with it, this video comes to you in 4 parts.
So, be warned now that this video is going to spoil absolutely everything about Nier Gestalt, and the upcoming remake, and the critical plot point in Nier Automata as well. If you've heard good things, but you know you're never going to play them, or you already have and you want to join me in my suffering pit as we await the remake, then welcome. I'll stick the kettle on. If not, well, you are warned. Cookie?
Part 1. Black Scrawl and Empty Pages. We begin in a city covered in snow in summer, a washed-out apocalypse of industrial skeletons. A man dozes fitfully, a disembodied voice tempting him to reach out and take its power to save his daughter. All it will cost is his soul. A little girl huddles in a corner, sickly and starving, and encourages her father, Nier, to take a cookie that she scavenged to keep her strength up. He refuses and tells her that she needs it more, and we hear the telltale sounds of monsters approaching. Nier tells her to stay put and not to touch the ominous tome next to her no matter what. We assume control and go take care of the bad guys, and demonstrate our hypocrisy by using the book ourselves to gain more power to protect Yona, damaging ourselves for her sake and bearing the burden of inhumanity to save her. We slaughter hundreds of weird, flickering shadow people called Shades in an increasingly violent fashion. Our attacks grow more powerful and more monstrous as we get increasingly determined to protect Yona. Blood spatters the snow, and when we finally stem the flow of monsters, we hurry back to her, and spoilers, she touched the book. A mysterious black script flows up her body, and she already seems sicker, breaking into another painful coughing fit. But she seems more worried about dropping the promised cookie, mumbling about Nier always being the one to help her as she begins to lose consciousness. He tries to wake her, shouting frantically for help. And fast forward 1,000 years and change, and here's the same Nier and Yona in a medieval fantasy town? Yona's still sick, and Nier's working hard to earn enough money to buy her the medicine she needs, as well as collaborating with one of the town leaders to research her illness, the Black Scrawl. Did she get infected from that book in the opening? Is this even the same girl? The same world? All we know from Nier's voiceover is that this world is sick and dying, and now more and more people are contracting the ominous Black Scrawl. But this initial setup gives us a good enough excuse to do the usual RPG starting area quests. Fetch me a thing, buy me some eggs, hunt me a monster. Standard fare. And Nier protects the village by fighting some more of those little flickery beasties just outside of the village. Huh. So they're still around. Albeit a bit smaller than the ones we've encountered already. His main concern is Yona though, as he pours all of his time and energy into keeping his daughter alive and convincing her to rest. She's a curious child though, and desperately wants to get better, as she feels she's a massive drain on Nier. She tries to cook for him, sneaks out to get some sunshine and to chat to Popola in the library, borrowing as many books as she can. But even so, these aren't just stories to read while stuck in bed. They're books she thinks might be useful in curing her. She doesn't have much of an identity for herself outside of her illness, as it's consuming both her body and constantly preying on her thoughts, and she just wants to get better. And the root of that isn't even the horrible pain and breathing problems she's suffering from, but that she wants Nier to be able to live a normal life that doesn't revolve around her. We receive several letters from her whilst out adventuring, telling Nier about her day and asking him to come home, as being without him is making her sadder than the illness. The loading screens sometimes have snippets of her journal too, recording her day-to-day life and her wishes for Nier to come home and to meet the friends he's been writing to her about. And Yona can't really attach to much else to help develop an identity, as she hasn't got much previous life experience before her illness, being sickly even before the Black Scrawl developed. But she knows it's not supposed to be like this. She has very little agency as a young child, being 10 in Gestalt, but she's only 7 in Replicant, making her even more vulnerable and reliant on her brother, and at even more of a loss when it comes to defining herself. Fathers are supposed to care for their children, but Replicant's Yona can see her brother isn't an adult either, and knows she's become the centre of his world, which is a massive source of guilt for her, and I think this works a lot better with the sibling dynamic. She's always pushing herself to be helpful at home and useful to Nier, usually with no prompting or even with warnings not to be, and to focus on her own well-being. Yona's body becomes her identity and the whole driving force of the plot. Nier finds her in the library after she'd been told to stay in bed and takes her home, trying to encourage her to rest by telling her a story about lunar tears. They're beautiful white moonflowers that are supposed to be able to grant any wish, if you can find one. They're extremely rare and bloom for very short amounts of time, but that makes them all the more precious. But Yona wants to know more about the flowers, so on her next library visit she asks one of the twin village leaders, Popola, about them, and Popola tells her that lunar tears have been rumoured to grow at the Lost Shrine, so of course Yona sets off to find one. She wants so badly to be free from her illness and the limitations of her body that she doesn't even think about the risks, and leaves the safety of the village immediately. Nier comes to her rescue, because the shrine is full of traps and more of those shade monsters, and we fight our first boss, Hansel and Gretel, after being led here by breadcrumbs of myth. A magical flower, a child consumed by a curse, and we find our main companion of the story, Grimoire Weiss.
Weiss, you dumbass!
Grimoire Vice serves as the magic and projectile system throughout the game, similar to the pods in Nier Automata. The more words of an ancient forgotten language that you find, and the more conjunctions of those words you're aware of, the stronger your spells can become. And combining words can let you min-max your magic. I just think that's a really neat way to develop your skills. Yokotaro dreams of bullet hell, and this is how he inflicts it upon us. I am bad at spatial awareness. Vice has lost a lot of his memory and lacks the words to articulate his magic, and so, as a book, he's literally missing pieces of himself. Popola tells us that he's been written of in myth and legend as the book containing the sealed verses to cure the Black Scrawl, destined to defeat the evil Grimoire Noir, but he seems to have lost them all. His words have been consumed by giant shades that we're going to have to hunt down and kill to unlock the secrets they've stolen. Nier retrieves Yona, sicker than ever with the Black Scrawl finally beginning to bloom across her skin. And with Vice freed from his prison, a little too roughly given his memory damage, he can go where he chooses, but most of his pages are blank. He lacks what defines a book: text. Of course, he still speaks a lot and is fairly droll with Nier, acting as the straight man during party banter. He's extremely sarcastic and begins much like a grumpy teacher bemoaning a slow student, but he warms up a lot and grows to love his odd little family by the end. I guess you can't judge a book by its cover, which is the entire point of the game. Your body does not define you. He grows to love the party, not because they find him the words he needs, but because they listen to the ones he has.
Vice!
Good to see you, Kaine. Although I don't think anyone has ever accused me of being a little bitch before.
Nier decides that Vice's sealed verses must be able to cure Yona and fixates on the idea, and Vice lends him the best hand page he can. But even though Nier's pinned all of his hopes on Grimoire Vice, he still prioritizes their friendship over destiny. Vice is very uppity and proud about his title, hating it when his name is abbreviated to just Vice. Sorry. Or worse, being referred to as Book. A book needs a title after all. He's very proud, positioning himself as a knowledgeable elder, and bases a lot of his identity and pride on his reputation as the great grimoire designed to carry the sealed verses, despite losing them. Right up until he meets grimoires Rubrum and Noir about halfway through the game, and we realise that there's something more sinister at play here. And hey, isn't that the book that Yona touched in the snowy opening? A lot of Vice's sharper banter and commentary is back and forth between Kaine rather than Nier, and for good reason. She has the absolute foulest mouth, and has no respect for Vice's posing, or patience for his snide commentary. She just lets loose with the most crass and vulgar threats and insults that she can think of.
I'm gonna pull out your teeth and cram them up your ass!
Kaine too's been rejected for her body, cast out from the Eyrie, and living with her grandmother just outside of the village. We find her here after being drawn to the little shack that she calls home, and we see a whole wreath of lunateers. Somehow, her grandma found enough flowers for a myriad of wishes, but still Kaine lives alone, cast out. No matter how many she gathered, her wishes never came true. And it's here, out of sight and out of mind, tended by the outcasts of the world, that the tears can bloom. Part 2. Flowers and Thorns. Kaine's grandma was killed several years ago, and the black scroll that shows on her body when she fights isn't due to illness, it's from being possessed by a shade. She's only physically half human. The villagers reject her, not only for her possession, but have harassed her for her entire life due to being born intersex, and so she was considered a freak and chased away, the other children throwing stones at her and beating her under their parents' deliberately blind eyes, or in some cases, approval. Now, as an adult, she deliberately dresses in a provocative and hyper-feminine way, pretty much wearing only pin-up lingerie, outwardly and proudly projecting her unmistakably female identity through her outfit. She doesn't back down with shame as she did as a child, or shy away from the people who chastise her, but rallies with the biting attitude picked up from her equally foul-mouthed grandma. She refuses to hide her body, silently daring anyone to challenge her now that she's equipped to fight. As an orphan child, her grandmother, Kali, took her in and kept Kaine away from the village as much as possible to let her grow up free from the judgment and harassment of the Eyrie. She taught her to be proud of who she was and made her the Lunateer wreath, being the first person to tell her that she's beautiful. Until, of course, her grandmother gets older and more frail, and Kaine has to be the one to care for her, fetching water and medicine from the village, but finds that she's able to stand up to her old bullies now. When she encounters them on errands, she's able to maintain her new brash exterior, even though she still feels like the same scared little girl inside. She still flinches away from adult strangers in anticipation of pain, but knows how to silence the other children, understanding that they've no real power over her. And there's a really sweet scene where she actually finds an unexpected ally in the apothecary, cringing away from him, but he calmly tells her that, yes, he's heard some nasty things about her because of her body. But he doesn't care a jot, and gives her some crayons to draw Kali with, after seeing Kaine fascinated with the portrait he'd drawn of his own daughter. Yokotaro said trans rights. One day, when Kaine returns from an errand, she finds their shack burning. A giant shade named Hook is crushing Kali slowly to death under his foot. Hook, sadistic, draws out as much suffering from Kaine as possible, ripping her left arm and leg off, and killing her grandmother in front of her. She's powerless, helpless. This is when the shade, Tyran, finds Kaine, her body mutilated and her mind on the verge of breaking with rage and despair, and the pair fuse. Kaine is granted the strength and power to get revenge on Hook, and Tyran regrows the limbs that were ripped from her body, cackling about how he loves the hatred fueling her will to live, and that he thrives on her bloodlust. He nicknames her Sunshine, and says that he'll lie dormant as long as she lives to kill, but should she ever soften, become too human, he'll forcefully seize her body. And so her personhood's taken from her control once again, this time from inside her own body. She wraps her shade limbs in bandages to keep them hidden. Even when Kaine finally does manage to kill Hook and free the Eerie, she's still not accepted, or I suppose forgiven, for her differences, and is still actively hated. They're intensely xenophobic, hating any outsiders, and don't trust Nier when he arrives with a message from Popola. They've decided it's Kaine's fault that Shades are beginning to infest the village, scapegoating her as a freak attracting further corruption, but she ignores them, living purely to avenge her grandma. When we actually get to fight him, the villagers continue to decry Kaine, even while she's saving their lives. Hook speaks with her grandmother's voice, telling her to give in and come to your grandma's side.
You have been lonely for so long.
He uses Kaine's internalized narrative against her, metaphorically burrowing under her skin, just like the literal monster inside of her, leveraging her self-hatred and role of outcast against her. For a moment, she is disoriented and disarmed by the familiar, loving voice. She considers it for a moment, and in true Kaine fashion threatens to rip its heart out with her bare hands. I love her.
And pull out your fucking heart!
She knows her grandmother would never say those things, but it still hurts. And as she fights the creature that killed her grandma, she shouts that Hook will never have any idea how much she despises herself, and fights all the harder. When the fight's over, Kaine realizes she's nothing left to live for, no identity to fall back on when the dust settles, or any emotional outlets besides violence. Injured and utterly exhausted, she gives up, asking her grandma if she can finally rest. She's had her revenge, and completed the final task that was fueling her to keep going, but Nier drags her back, proclaiming that he won't let her die now, and that she's stronger than this. And she reaches back. He tells her plainly that the two of them are friends now, and that's that. Taken aback, and uncertain how to proceed with such flat and uncompromising acceptance, she joins the group, keeping the others at a distance with constant barbed remarks, her guard up. But she realizes that she needs to find something else to live for besides vengeance, and she finds her solace with the other outcasts. As I mentioned, Kaine is partially possessed by a shade, Tyran, and she can harness his power, making her physically stronger, but draining her grip on her humanity. It's something to be tempered and kept in careful check, and after a rematch with Gretel, we see her go berserk, Tyran forcibly taking her body from her. She knows that to keep her humanity, or what's left of it, intact, she has to act inhumanely and keep killing, or she'll lose her body and agency. And crueler still, Tyran's presence means that she can hear the voices and cries of the shades she slaughters. And we get to hear that too on a second playthrough, blissfully unaware as Nier the first time round. She pushes herself to her limit often, feeling that it's one of the few things that makes her useful, and therefore gives her a modicum of self-worth. She tells Emil later that if she should ever completely lose herself, that he should kill her. Though we don't hear her say the words, it's heavily implied by Emil's reaction, and his physical burden is in a similar vein to Kaine's when we first meet him. He's a weapon that could easily lose control and hurt the people he cares about, but he imposes isolation upon himself rather than being forcefully rejected by the world like Kaine. Emil looks up to Kaine. He's shy and retiring, living with his butler in a mansion with all the colour and life drained from it, feeling somewhere between a gothic mansion and the classic Resident Evil manor. Honestly, this is one of my favourite areas because of the marriage of modern and classical themes, and the music's great. The track is moody and sad, but also has an almost electric driving thread through it, like a call to battle. It's called the ultimate weapon, and that's precisely what its master is. A living weapon designed to be unstoppable and to petrify anyone he lays his eyes on. Part 3. Living Weapons. Emil was an experimental subject all those thousands of years ago in the snowy city from the opening. One of a small group of children intended to be used as walking weapons, disarmingly and eternally young. Emil wears a blindfold, afraid he might accidentally petrify his butler or anyone who stumbles across his home, and the house is covered in evidence of his uncontrolled abilities given the grey and drained appearance of the entire area. And we can see human statues in the courtyard too. It's not clarified whether or not these were real people who Emil has accidentally hurt, but it's a real possibility. There's a mother chasing a running child, someone covering their mouth in surprise, and a man about to strike something, or maybe someone, with an axe. They could just be statues, but they all seem to be reacting to something. Perhaps he displayed them as a grim reminder to himself, a sort of penance or self-flagellation to keep him accountable. We don't get to know. The facility used for the experiments is still under the manor, and later in the game we have to fight our way down to it. Emil has lost a lot of his memory, and is trying to find a cure for somebody he petrified with his eyes, and he finds the solution he desires, in a painfully unexpected shape. His sister, Halua, was the first successful experiment, producing a massively destructive weapon, and the other children were disposed of, but Emil was kept as a failsafe. The scientists quickly lost control of her, and used her own brother as a countermeasure. Emil was given petrification powers specifically to restrain Halua, or what was left of her, and that damaged him so badly that he repressed the memories. But she's still alive and chained up in the basement, inhuman enough that she no longer needs to eat or drink and is filled with pure destructive rage. The only way to remove her as a threat permanently is for Emil to fuse with her, absorbing that rage with acceptance, glad to see his sister again, but physically removing him even further from humanity. Sound familiar? Anyone who's only familiar with Emil from Automata will find he looks a lot more familiar now, as he takes on the skeletal appearance of Halua and can now float around like Vice. He looks more monstrous than ever and immediately bursts into tears, crying that nobody will ever want to be around him now, even though he can finally look at everyone without hurting them. But Nier calmly accepts him, telling him that we're here for you, no matter what. And Emil finally sees his friend's face for the first time.
You look just like I thought you would.
Emil becomes the heart of the group with his empathy, humanity and hopefulness. He's dreamed of connecting to other people and being able to leave the manor for centuries, but his body prevented him from doing so. Now, finally able to connect to people without the fear of hurting them, he looks more monstrous than ever, and he's rejected on sight by ordinary people. He chooses to sleep outside of whichever settlement the group's currently staying at, in order to better keep the peace, along with Kaine, who's been doing the same thing out of habit. This brings him closer to Kaine though, as they spend their nights telling each other stories, and Kaine looks out to him like a younger brother. It gives him a new sibling, and gives Kaine someone who can relate to and understand her position and fears, even if they rarely want to talk about it. Kaine tells him that his eyes are an intrinsic part of him, and says they're not a sin, and to never be ashamed of them, anticipating the sorts of internal narrative Emil will have constructed out of fear and self-hatred from her own experiences. There's a relief in being understood and accepted without the need to unravel yourself and your private experiences to make that deep connection, in finding someone who on a core level already knows, and won't be surprised or shocked by the ways you think about yourself, or the need to mask. Kaine understands. Wherever they go, the group is often needed to deal with shades and monsters and hear about increasingly frequent cases of the Black Scrawl, but they're never really accepted as people, merely tolerated for the useful things that they can do, and it factors heavily into a lot of the characters' respective self-worths. Kaine lives to fight, Nier lives to protect Yona, Weiss lives for the prophecy, and Emil lives to try and gain acceptance and see the world that he was forced to blind himself to for centuries. And the way he does that is by trying to make friends and be loved. But he's often immediately rejected thanks to his new body, and he says in his final stand at the game's end,
"You know, when I was young, I hated my eyes. And now that I'm older, I hate what my body has become. But there's something else there now. Something like pride. You know?"
It allows him to finally have friends and to choose to protect rather than destroy, as he ultimately chooses to sacrifice himself for them, despite his fear of death. Each of the cast represents a different facet of humanity. Yona is mortality and the fear of burdening our loved ones. Nier is the part of us that would give everything to protect someone we love, and the fear of losing them. Grimoire Weiss is how some people cope with the feeling of inadequacy or not measuring up to expectations, and how they mask it with hollow pride and bluster. Kaine represents the very real way people turn to anger and violence to cope with suffering and discrimination. Emil's the heart of the group, showing childlike curiosity and kindness to everything he meets, and he helps everyone face their fears with empathy, but he still needs them to do the same for him. None of them have any control over how others perceive them, but they can choose how to treat each other, and they're often forced to use their abilities against each other in the most sympathetic way possible. When Popola's library back in the village is attacked by a giant shade, Emil has to seal the door by petrifying Kaine. 5 whole years pass as Emil has to sit with the guilt that one of his only 3 friends he's ever had is trapped in stone because of him, and that she chose to ask him to do this to protect him and the others. And that hurts. Their little group's still young, and each member's still unsure of themselves, but absolutely certain of each other. Emil trusts Kaine enough to carry out her plan, and Kaine trusts Emil enough to let him petrify her in place, prioritizing the rest of their group instead of charging blindly into the shades for a suicidal blaze of glory as she did when we first met her. The leader of the Shades, the Shadow Lord, appears, and takes Yona for an unknown reason, and for the next 5 years, Nier spends his time training, trying desperately to track her down and find out why and where she's been taken. This is what pushes Emil to dig through the mansion to uncover anything that might reverse petrification in order to free Kaine. And the discovery of some of the researcher's notes means he has to take the plunge and explore that underground facility, finally seeing his monstrous sister and recovering his memories. To be human, he has to release Halua from her prison, as her humanity was killed long ago and all that's left is pain. With their combined powers, he can remove his petrification curse and save Kaine, but he has to fight Halua. Just before he does, he says,
"If my sister somehow manages to swallow me up, my original self becomes lost. I'm afraid I may try to hurt all of you. And if that happens...
No, don't!
I want you to kill me."
Like Kaine and Tyran, Emil needs to balance her monstrosity with his humanity and temper the two to remain spiritually human. He has to absorb Halua's pain and fuse together with her and calmly let her go. To be human, he has to kill. When Kaine is finally released from her stone prison, she recognizes Emil immediately, despite his massive physical changes. Again, she doesn't need to be told. She understands. The gang are finally back together and are making up for lost time. Kaine welcomed warmly back into the group, and Nier offers her a gift. A new wreath of lunar tears. Kaine tries to brush it off, saying it's nothing like the ones Grandma used to make, but the implications are crystal clear, and she's deeply grateful and accepts her new family, and I'm crying again, Yoko Taro! But then immediately, Popola appears and cuts through the happy scene by asking her and Emil to leave because the villagers are afraid of them. Nier's outraged, and it dawns on him that this is the reason they've been sleeping outside the entire game. Kaine and Emil have lived this way so long that they aren't really upset by it, just resigned. It's a fact of life for them, and a waste of energy to dwell on or fight against. And that's a real gut punch to Nier, especially as it hadn't ever occurred to him as a possibility. It's just not something that's ever been a factor for him. He says to Weiss, "Kaine always sleeps outside. How have I not noticed that before? How selfish am I?" As the realization suddenly recontextualizes a lot of Kaine's behavior to him, and her standoffish claims that their village jobs bore her, or she prefers being alone so I'll wait outside. It catches him off guard, and suddenly he sees the world as his friends have to. And it's inhuman. He's fully prepared to go in, all guns blazing, thinking to himself that he wants to strangle Popola, but he recognizes that anger won't solve the problem, so returns home, fuming. He goes to apologize in the morning, but Popola tells him, "Don't you dare apologize," and tells him that he has the right to be angry, and so do his friends, but the people are scared and can't change overnight, to give it time. He needs to be realistic rather than idealistic. He hates it, but he recognizes it's necessary, and apologizes to them on Popola's behalf as he feels it's the right thing to do. But it drives him further to protect his friends. They don't need him to fight for them, but he would without question. And they know that. They shouldn't have to justify their existence, but at least with each other, they can just be. Part 4. Snow in Summer. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Kaine can hear the voices of other shades thanks to her possession. Well, the thing about shades is they're partially human themselves. Yep, nobody we've actually met in this game is human at all. They're replicants. They're the human bodies left behind after the gestalts, or the souls, or as we've been calling them, shades, have been separated from. Those monsters we've been killing are disembodied human souls. If you played Automata, you'll know that the androids we control are working to protect the humans and their server on the moon, but that the supplies being sent up there are empty to maintain the illusion that the humans are still there, waiting to come home. But humanity's long extinct. What remains up on that server is Gestalt data, codified souls ready to be inserted into new bodies once the Earth recovers from the apocalypse, an incurable disease called white chlorination syndrome. The only human left is Emil, if we can even call him that now. And these replicants we've been playing as? They're empty bodies that were meant to be temporarily abandoned until the plague had burned itself out before being refused with their gestalts. But the world isn't fixed yet, so they're wandering around and playing out the motions of everyday life, watched over by androids like Deviler and Popola, until they eventually gained their own senses of self. And the game asks us, is it ethical to impose an old consciousness on a body that's already created its own? This wasn't intentional, but now it's something that's going to affect every single person in the world. Those shades you have to fight at the start of your adventure, they drop school books. They were just children wandering around near the village. Tyran, the shade inside Kaine, taunts her regularly and questions her morality in fighting the shades when she can understand them and make that human connection. When we refight Gretel in the area we found Weiss, we can hear her vow to protect all the little child shades, but we slaughter her anyway. The Black Scrawl isn't an illness, it's a state of relapse as the body tries to purge itself of that new consciousness, removing the replicant consciousness that shouldn't be. Once a gestalt, or shade, relapses, they lose all sense of self, all humanity. They become violent and aggressive, which is why they randomly attack. There's no humanity left to return to their bodies. The replicants we see that have the Black Scrawl only have it because their corresponding gestalts are beginning to relapse, and once they do, well, game over. They can't even have that codified version of the soul re-downloaded or remade into a new body, because the relapse has corrupted that data. According to Yokotaro, Kaine being born intersex was literally because of a small glitch when her gestalt data was being written, so that's cool. We even meet one of the storage computers, Sleeping Beauty. A massive tree, possibly a computer overtaken by nature, but I like to think she's a massive neural network of humanity's past, memories, and emotions rooted in the natural connections living trees and fungi already make. Fungi and trees often have symbiotic relationships, the fungi burrowing into the tree roots to trade nutrients, and fungi can communicate over large areas underground through their mycelial networks via electrical neurosignals. If a mushroom on one side of a forest gets trodden on, you can actually observe others on the other side of the woods reacting defensively, curling in, because they know danger's coming. I really like nature and technology becoming closer together in fiction, because it maintains that idea of connection and life humming through everything, whether it's cables or tree roots. But I digress. In this tree-shaped computer, there's a consciousness inside, shaped like a shade. They're picking over the slowly corrupting memories, each one with an emotion attached to them, neatly named and labelled by feeling, though the tree itself isn't designed to feel. It matches colours, emotions and stories through every jewel-shaped memory, looking almost fondly at the stories encased in each one. Nier mistakenly attacks the shade, jewels bursting from its body, and the tree actually feels the emotions it's been storing through Nier's touch. It makes a genuine human connection through the shade that's come to be a part of the computer's hollow body. It's created a soul, just like the replicants. Nier unfortunately takes the spilling jewels as proof of the shade eating those memories, rather than recognising that age and lost purpose has corroded the system, and kills the shade. But we do get to witness a few memories of the old world, including a hint at the cause of the white chlorination syndrome. The image of a red dragon is thought of fondly, despite the story being forgotten. At the end of Drakengard, the game before Nier, the red dragon that the protagonist bonds with falls from the sky after killing the huge queen beast, a queen beast made of salt. In that other world, white chlorination syndrome was running rampant, and the queen's defeat sent out enough energy for the dragon to cross dimensions, entering our Tokyo and plummeting from the sky, her body becoming skewered on top of Tokyo Tower. This was supposed to be a joke ending to reference Evangelion, but Yoko Taro clearly had other plans. The dragon and queen's bodies begin to partially disintegrate, and a white, salt-like substance sloughs from their skin and rains down upon the earth, bringing magic to our world, along with an otherworldly disease. To survive this new threat, scientists began to experiment with this new magic, trying to discover how to split body and soul. As I said earlier, I'm basing this series' analysis on the alchemical tria prima, the things that alchemists used to believe a person was made of. Salt, unsurprisingly, represents the body. You've probably heard the phrase, salt of the earth? And here, white chlorination syndrome slowly turns the human body into, if you haven't guessed by the name, salt. Hence, people abandoning their bodies until the disease could be cured. The more people who became infected and chlorinated, the more magical salt was released into the air, raining down as snow. And now we know why the opening scene was snowy, and why one of the main tracks in the game is called Snow in Summer. That wasn't snow. The world is covered in the ashes of plague-ridden bodies broken down and released up into the sky, only to be rained down and breathed in by their next target. Grim. Humans vacated their bodies and left behind androids as guardians to watch over them until they can safely return to their flesh, and Nier's village is, manned? By the twin models Deviler and Popola. Popola's the wise and measured leader, preferring to stay out of the way and bury herself in books, researching the best way to cure the Black Scrawl and formulate plans and fortifications to protect her villagers. Deviler's far more outgoing and outspoken. She's the people person of the duo, often being found out and about in town, singing by the fountain or in the bar. She likes a drink and chats to everyone, keeping an eye on the townspeople's morale and their problems, trying her best to keep them happy and reporting back to Popola, but the task is impossible. They have to maintain their village and keep everyone as happy as possible, astounded by the personalities that have emerged from the soulless husks of the humans they're programmed to love and respect. There's a massive emotional strain of maintaining the secrecy of Project Gestalt, and they only have one another to rely on, holding each other at night as each day brings more and more fear. Each settlement was given guardians like Deviler and Popola, and we find in Automata that some were even given identical models with the same names. But they're far more afraid than the replicants because they understand that each dead replicant is another human gone forever, and that they're letting humanity slip through their grasp, powerless to stop it. And they feel that in their mechanical guts, becoming more and more human themselves as they do so. And they fail. The replicants get increasingly infected, the shades, corrupted gestalts, attack increasingly frequently, and they're forced to watch as their world slowly grows smaller. As we approach the Shadow Lord's castle, just beyond the shrine where we found Vice, we encounter two mechanical doves that ask us a series of questions that function as passwords. Though Nier's still ignorant of the truth, Weiss slowly remembers. Why did humans disappear from the world?
I answer because of a black disease.
How can humans extend their lives?
I answer by separating body from soul.
What is the destination of souls?
I answer they are placed in their corresponding shells.
Grimoire Weiss has his destiny, has his role. He was designed to fuse with Grimoire Noir to return all the Gestalts to their replicants, but having lost his memory, Noir and the twins think he's a traitor. But now that he's been removed from the situation for so long, and has bonded with all of these people and can feel things for them, he now implicitly has the responsibility to weigh up that decision himself and decide whether it's the right thing to do. Before he has the chance, the twins strip him of his magic, literally taking his words and tell him that the sealed verses he prides himself on holding were only ever borrowed. His identity is not as a whole person, he's half of a mechanism. Every member of our group has had their personhood repeatedly invalidated or forcibly ripped from them at this point, and they just want it to stop. But the people behind it, the twins and the Shadow Lord, are in the exact same position. If we'd played from their perspectives, we'd have seen a very similar story. The twins relying on each other and desperately trying to keep people happy, hiding their physical differences. The Shadow Lord frantically trying to find his daughter and cure her sickness, accompanied by a floating grimoire. He and Nier are two sides of the same coin, a replicant and his Gestalt. The twins have to confront Nier as he approaches the Shadow Lord, but can't allow him to kill his own Gestalt, and they can't even explain why either. But to Nier, they're just in the way, so he attacks and he kills Devila. As she dies in her sister's arms, she gives this small speech about the cruelty and empathy of humanity.
Hey, Popola. You crying? No! Don't die! You know, I understand now why we're twins. It's because we were born without souls. Devila! I can't stop the bleeding. Oh God, I can't stop it! This world is too lonely for one without a soul. There's too much emptiness. Our souls are missing, but our tears still work. That's kind of weird. Sorry, sis. I love you.
And then she just dies? And Mr. Taro, why? Nier is the Shadow Lord's replicant, the first successful and stable splitting of body and soul without relapse. The rest of the world's replicants are modelled from him. He's the unwitting Adam of a new species. That explains the 1,000-year time skip. It was the Shadow Lord, or Nier's Gestalt, that we saw in the opening of the White Snowy City. We saw his humanity as he cared for his daughter dying of white chlorination syndrome. His love for Yona and drive to protect her meant he volunteered for numerous experiments, likely the same teams that damaged Emil and Halua, anything to save Yona. And he succeeds in a way, but because she's already sick, her replicant is born infected with the Scrawl. She will always relapse. And the script you've been seeing on Yona and Kaine? An observant viewer might have picked out that it's 4 repeating characters in little strings. That's right, it's DNA. It is literal human code. The physical underpinnings of what makes a human, but no code we've ever found can program a soul. The Shadow Lord put Yona into some sort of stasis, keeping her asleep so the Scrawl would stop progressing and he could buy time to work out how to cure her. To wake her, you need to type the name of the person she loves most. Nier. Or whatever you named your character. I really hope you didn't name him something silly because now you'll be laughing and crying. She finally awakens, and her Gestalt is on the verge of merging with her replicant, the Yona we've known throughout the game. But she stops. Gestalt Yona realizes that the replicant Yona's still in there, and she can feel the love she has for her own father and her desire to live and hope for the future. She knows that she has to choose which of them gets to keep the body and which of them has to die, and she has to look at both versions of her father in the face as she makes her decision. And she makes the humane choice to abandon her body and let our Nier's Yona live, sacrificing her body and soul so an innocent can live. The whole game is balanced around how human someone is deemed to be. How do they look? How do they act? What do they want? But there's not a single human character in the game by its end. Only the flesh, the bodies, remain as the souls go mad with nothing to ground them and tether them to the earth. The world is haunted by the mistakes of humans trying to survive by becoming something else, a shadow of humanity. But their bodies go on to eventually repair their wounded state by creating a new soul, whilst their abandoned souls howl in pain with no body to return to. The main cast we come to love is made up of outcasts who don't quite fit the requirements of human, even by replicant standards, but they're all people, and that's a very clear-cut distinction. Those empty bodies subconsciously rebelled against their emptiness and birthed new lives for themselves, unlocked new ways of being, and they're all so very human. So, to answer our big question, is it your body that makes you human? Evidently not. The flesh is malleable, adaptable, and corruptible. All these characters are human. We accept Kaine as a woman, despite being intersex. We accept her as human, despite her possession. Emil is Emil, even though his body's anything but human. There's something internal, an essence of a person, that persists even when the body's altered, or was never even meant to be yours. And that brings us nicely onto our part 2, the soul. We'll be looking at Nier Automata and its cast of androids to see what makes them tick.
If you're watching from the future, there'll be a link in the description to go watch that now. If not, well, you'll have to give me a couple of weeks to unpick all of this. There's a lot. This project has kind of snowballed. I was expecting to do maybe half an hour on humanity in the Drake and Nier series, but you can see how much of one aspect there was in one game, and there's so much more I could have said. I decided to limit myself to just the main cast, just for the sake of time. But make sure to like and subscribe so you know when part 2's up, and I'll see you next time. Comment your thoughts below as well, I'd love to know what you think. Thanks a lot.